It's wonderful to see everybody. It's wonderful to see everybody in person. It's wonderful to be back in person. It's been too long, and it's great to see everyone. It's Baruch Hashem. It's wonderful to see a full base medrash. I've had a cheshek for a long time already, since probably more than a year ago, to learn Shabbos HaAretz. This year, of course, is Shmitta, is the Shmitta year. Arguably the most monumental work on Shmitta, written in the last few centuries, is Rav Kook's work Shabbos HaAretz. Today in Israel, I think they call it Shabbat HaAretz. But Rav Kook called it Shabbos HaAretz. He was an Ashkenazi. What can you do, right? He was a Lithuanian. Shabbos HaAretz. Rav Kook, in fact, I was having this discussion with some chaver a little while ago. Rav Kook himself was very makpid on maintaining and retaining his Havara Ashkenazis, ad kedei kach that Rav Kook was of the opinion that if an Ashkenazi says Shema with a Mivtah Svaradi, he's not Yotze. He was Charif. He was Charif on this. He was Kul Kulei Ashkenazi. That was his orientation. So Shabbos HaAretz, that's the name of the sefer. We'll call it as such. Shabbos HaAretz is a sefer of halacha. Primarily, it's a sefer of halacha. Arguably, the most monumental piece of it, historically, was that it was Rav Kook's treatise on the Heter Mechira, on the permissibility of selling land in Eretz Yisrael to non-Jews prior to the Shnas HaShmita, so as not to obligate the Jews that are farmers there in all of Hilchos Shmita. Now, of course, that relies upon many, many, many pieces of halacha. Most notably is that Shmita Bisman Hazeh, according to all poskim, is not deraisa. It is not a biblical obligation to keep Shmita today. It's a dimid rabbanim. That was a lot of the historical notoriety of the sefer. But we have a tradition already. I don't know what the origin of this is, but you see this all over Sfarim, and an experience bears it out. Is that a sefer is split into two parts: a guf and a neshama, body and soul. The body of the sefer is the sefer. The soul of the sefer is the introduction, always. That's where the mechaber puts their kishkas, what the neshama of what they want the reader, the audience to get. It's the neshama of the sefer. So Shabbos HaAretz is a sefer in halach, undoubtedly. But the neshama of the sefer is in the Akdama, and it is Kedarka Shel Rav Kook. The whole thing is neshamadik. In the Hakdama to Shabbos HaAretz, which is not long, it's only a bunch of pages, depending on the print. The biggest print I could find, which is the one that you have here, it's 28 pages. You can probably fit it into like 4 pages double-sided if you want. Still make it legible. But the neshama of Shabbos HaAretz, of Rav Kook's entire view of Shmita, which is also the view of time and space and reality and Klal Yisrael and the past, present, and the future of the world, all of that is poured into the Akdama of Shabbos HaAretz. Now, we're not going to have time even to get through the first 3 lines of Shabbos HaAretz today, because there's a packet on that. So we'll see how far we get. This was written about 110 years, a little more. It was on the eve of the Shnas HaShmita of 1909 going into 1910. Shortly after Rav Kook had come to Eretz Yisrael, which is at the beginning of that century, he was tasked with a position that he inherited. He was tasked with arranging for the Heter Mechira. I have a colleague that, as a young man, took a job as a Rav in a very large town. The rabbi of the shul that he took over from used to be the guy that was Mesader, the Mechiras Chametz. So he took the job in his late 20s, and all of a sudden, he was the Mesader for the Mechiras Chametz for like everybody in the town. So it was a nerve-wracking thing. He inherited that position. So Rav Kook did the same. He inherited the position of needing to provide a heter mechira. Now, he wouldn't have done so had he not believed in it. And he had tremendous opposition in his belief in the importance of heter mechira. One could argue, and we'll see this, that it is in many ways antithetical to Rav Kook's thought. The importance of the Yishuv Eretz Yisrael and Kedushas Eretz Yisrael, all of these pieces of it, notwithstanding, Rav Kook believed in the heter mechira. The Ritbaz, who had just 4 or 5 years earlier had just made Aliyah from Chicago in 1905, was one of his primary detractors in this. He argued that Rav Kook had been convinced and persuaded by the Chilonim and the people that were not B'nai Torah to find some kind of finagled way of allowing them to subvert the din of the Torah of keeping Shmitta. And Rav Kook explained to him in numerous letters what his opinion was, deeply embedded in Machshavas Yisrael and in Kabbalah and in Chassidus and in Ramchals and Marals and Shlos and Graz and Zohar and Arizal. And the Ritbaz, who was a Litvak through and through, said, I don't buy any of that. And said, I'm not interested, I think what you're doing is wrong. So much so that the Ritbaz himself, on the Erev of that Shmitta, when Rav Kook had published the Sefer, bought a piece of land, dafka, so that he could leave it. When Rav Kook was arranging for everybody else to sell the land, the Ritbaz went and bought a piece of land so that he could keep Shmitta. Now Rav Kook was not opposed to that. If you wanted to keep Shmitta, you certainly could. But in order to understand all of this, Rav Kook gives us the neshama of Shmitta. And he begins, you'll see this just on the first double-sided page here, Hakdama l'Shabbos HaAretz. And I found I think really the only version online with big print and with Nekudas as well. And he begins with Hakdama l'Shabbos HaAretz, the introduction to the Sefer Shabbos HaAretz, Rashi Prokim al Erech HaShmita v'Hayovel, some headline chapters on the value of Shmita and Yovel, because they go hand in hand, as we will see. B'chaye Yisrael bichlal, the life of the Jewish people as a whole, in totality, u'v'schias ha'uma, and in the resurrection of the Jewish people. Tchia, it's the tchias hamesim of the Jewish people, crawling out from the hellhole that was Europe, and this is before the Holocaust of Islam. From 1,000 years of European persecution of Jews, 2,000 years of Churban, there's a tchiyah. There's a return to life of the Jewish people. This is the story of Shmita. So this is the story of Chai Yisrael Bichlal U'Vizchias Ha'uma, the resurrection of our nation, Ha'aretz v'Hatorah, the land and the Torah, Ba'or Hashem Chei Ha'elamim, with the light of Hashem, the life of all worlds. It's a pretty big mission statement for the introduction. The value of Shmita and Yovel in the life of the Jewish people as a whole and in the resurrection of the people. The story of the land of Israel and Torah with the light of Hashem, the life of all worlds. That's what he is attempting to explain here. We could spend another 6 or 7 years just peeling apart each word here. We're not going to, because as we go through, we'll see some of that making more sense. Yeah?
It's a historical question. At the time that he was writing the Sefer, historical book, how much privately owned land was there?
More than before. Meaning, this is... Yes. So this was really at the dawn of like a serious Jewish settlement in Eretz Yisrael. This is shortly after the First Zionist Congress. There are many, many Jews that are escaping Europe, as the historical context is that Jews by the end of the 1800s discovered that the Haskalah was not going to save them. Right? Meaning, for 100 years before that, Jews imagined that by downgrading their Jewishness and assimilating into non-Jewish culture, they would be able to get by better, right? And that gave rise to reform. And I mean, tragically, at the beginning of the 1800s, 10% of German Jews converted to Christianity with no coercion. They just wanted opportunities. And those opportunities were available to them if they converted. And they were allowed to convert. So you see, reform was a response to that. It's worth understanding, right? Meaning, reform was a response to Jews converting into Christianity because they wanted to have opportunities. Reform effectively said, don't become Christian, stay Jewish, but like Jewish light. And then you could, you'll be able to still be able to be part of German civilization. You won't be too like Jewy. Don't be too Jewy. They'll be okay with you. It didn't work out very well. The Haskalah was like the next step of that. It was joining the intellectual elite of Europe. That also bombed. It didn't work. Meaning it didn't stop Jews from being persecuted. It didn't stop anti-Semitism. Zionism, to a large extent, as a secular movement, arose as the embers of the Haskalah were burning out. And this is just like a very, very simplified version of history. But Zionism arose from realizing that nothing will save the Jews from European Christian anti-Semitic persecution. We need to go somewhere and do something and be part of our own country. Zionism was born as a political secular movement out of that ideology. So by the late 1800s, many Jews are making their way to Eretz Yisrael.
The question I have is,
Selling land, yeah.
was it done communally? Because
Yes.
again, they have to sell by Jews, the community, not individual.
Yeah, so it was sold commonly, meaning we're talking about kibbutzim and moshavim, that meaning for the first time in history, Jews were building agricultural settlements in the land of Israel. There have been Jews moving to Israel for the last 200 years, the Talmidei Hagra and the Talmidei Habal Shem, but they weren't agriculturists.
So our cook was not dealing with hundreds of individual farmers.
No.
You know, it's
Largely the kibbutz, the moshav, right? They were private individuals as well, but yeah. Yes.
It was only the Moshavim.
Yes, and there were a lot of machlokes about this, meaning the Chevra in Yerushalayim, most of which were not connected to agriculturists at all. They opposed the Heter Mechira. What you say? There were a few, 100%. But meaning overwhelmingly, most of the people that were farming were not connected to Torah mitzvahs at all. Like they weren't interested in it. And a lot of Rav Kook's pushback that he got was from engaging with these people to start with. But he begins with two quotes. One is a pasuk that everybody's familiar with, and one is the Zar's perish on that pasuk. Pasuk says, "Umi ka'amcha Yisrael goy echad ba'aretz." We know that pasuk. Who is like the Jewish people? One goy ba'aretz, in the land. What does goy mean? Nation, right? Nation. Doesn't mean nation. So the Lashon Goy really means gvia, a body. Means a body. Rav Shechter likes to point out from Rav Soloveitchik that we have the notion colloquially, even in Tanakh, Shalei Ason Kegoy Ha'aratzos, that's a colloquialism. La halacha, the only Goy is the Jewish people. We're the Goy. We're the Goy. The rest of the world is not called Goyim, they are called Mishpachas. HaKadosh Baruch Hu says to Abraham, Yisbaruchu b'zarcha kol mishpachas Adam. Your children will be the bracha for all of the families of earth. Now this has nafkaminas lahalacha, it's why Jews are Jews as a result of matrilineal descent, and non-Jews have their status as a result of patrilineal descent. Those halachas notwithstanding, Goy means one unified identity, one entity. For this reason, Rav Soloveitchik was adverse to making the bracha in the morning, Shaloi Asani Goy. He said, what do you mean, Shaloi Asani Goy? You didn't make me a Goy. You did make me a Goy. I'm a Jew. The Jew is the only Goy, the halacha. So Rav Soloveitchik preferred the nusach Shaloi Asani over Kuchab. Nachri. You have different nuschas. But Shalai Sani Goy thought was incorrect la halacha. What you say?
I never saw a different. I haven't seen a sitter that has a.
So
Maybe
you can also Moshe. I picked up a several a little while ago. Makari Hatfila. It's called all the Makaris of like all the different nuschas of all the different tefillas from all the sidurim. It's an excellent sefer. I'll take a look. I'll see where those nuschas came from. But yeah, they've got that. Okay. Shalom Sani Nachri. So Shalom Sani Okum some have as well. But Mika Amcha Yisrael Goy Echad Ba'aretz. Who is like the Jewish people? One unified nation Ba'aretz. Now Ba'aretz is interesting. Yeah, it is on that word that the Zohar HaKadosh is commenting. Take a look underneath. Goy Echad Ba'aretz. One nation Ba'aretz in the land. He says Vadai Ba'aretz Hem Goy Echad. In the land there are one nation. Ima Ikrun Echad. V'loi Inun Bil Chudayu. With the land, we are one. Without it, we are alone. We are separate. Meaning the unity of the Jewish people, says the Zohar HaKadosh, is dependent on us being in Eretz Yisrael. The unity of the Jewish people, I'll repeat that. The unity of the Jewish people depends on our presence in Eretz Yisrael. Yeah.
Yes, but this Zohar, if I'm not mistaken, talks about not gods.
Yes. Oh no, what Rav Kook is doing here is talking about the broad picture of what Shmitta is. He's going to go from 30,000 feet all the way down.
But arguably, most of the people are not very strong. We don't have this status.
Correct. Don't worry, we'll get there. Meaning, you are correct.
If all the Jews were in Israel, it would be Midianites.
Maybe. It depends. What we'll see is that everybody needs to be not only in Eretz Yisrael, but in their ancestral homeland. Every shevet needs to be where each shevet is. So we'll get there. That's la halacha. Each shevet needs to be in its appropriate place. It's not just a question of Roiv Yoshvei Aleh. It has to be in their correct placement. And we'll get there. We'll get there. It's Gush Dan. Okay. The Maharal makes use of this, and we'll get there in a moment. The Maharal in Nesivat Tzedakah is going to make reference to this piece of the Zohar. I want to read just the 4 lines under the Aleph, and then we'll start picking things apart here. Says Rav Kook as follows. He says, Hashmita v'hayovel bazmanim, Shmita and Yovel in time, Misyachasim ze lozeh, relate to each other, K'may hachama v'halavana ba'olam, like the sun and the moon in the world, K'may Yisrael v'ha'adam b'nefashos, and like Yisrael and the Adam in nefashos. And we're going to have to define what all of that means. But the structure that he's setting up here originates in the Sefer Yetzirah, that the entirety of the Bria, the entirety of the world, can be separated into 3 basic categories, which are Olam, Shana, and Nefesh. In simple English, Olam means space. Shana is time, Nefesh is people. Olam, Shana, and Nefesh. These 3 areas, Olam, Shana, and Nefesh, span the entirety of the Bria. Everything exists in some way, shape, manner, or form in all 3 of these places, spaces, times. For example, classic example, is in the world of Kedusha, we have Kedusha in Zman, we have Kedusha in Makom, and we have Kedusha in Nefesh. The apex, the paradigm of Kedusha in those 3 spaces would be the Kohen Gadol on Yom Kippur in the Kodesh HaKadosh. Right? Kohen Gadol is the most Mekudesh of people. You have Yom Kippur, which is the most Mekudesh in Zman, and the Kodesh HaKadosh, which is the most Mekudesh in Makom. Olam, Shana, and Nefesh. But within those realms, Olam, Shana, and Nefesh, there are things that relate to each other. And Rav Kook is therefore drawing an equivalence here. That there are relationships in the world of Olam, relationships in the world of Shana, and relationships in the world of Nefesh. For example, Shmitta and Yovel have a relationship in Zman, in time. Shmitta, every 7 years, relates to Yovel every 50 years. Much like the sun and the moon in space. Those entities, as physical entities in space, relate to each other. And Yisrael v'ha'adam, and Yisrael and the Adam. What does ha'adam mean? So it's Meduyak here. People. Which people? Jewish people?
No,
The rest of the world?
the rest of the world.
This is a Taisus in Baba Kamen in Yevamis. We'll get there. And then he says, and you have to understand that every word that Rav Kook is saying here is laden with immense makaris. Every word is chosen very specifically. He says, Yachas haprat vehaklal. There is a relationship of the individual, the identifiable, and the klal and the category. Shehem b'muvanam ha'atzmi ha'yoser chai v'ha'yoser ruchani, which are, at its essence, in the most living and the most spiritual ways, prat and klal tzrichim zelazeh. They need each other. Prat and klal need each other. Prat hatzarech leklal, klal hatzarech leprat. Where's that line from? Rabbi Shmuel. What is Rabbi Shmuel doing here? Okay, so we have a lot to unpack. Now, this is the kind of thing that, like, if you read through, you're like, oh, okay, he's saying nice things. But in order to understand, to be yurid to the omek of what he's saying here, we need to peel apart where he's coming from and what he's saying and why he's saying these words. So, let's talk about this line from the Zohar. Shabbos HaAretz. Without the land of Israel, we are not one, and with it, we are. Turning over the page, you'll see the Maharal Nesivat Tzedakah Perek Vav. The Maharal is talking about the Isur of Ribis. What's Ribis? Taking interest. Charging people for lending them money. There is an Isur. Take a look, the page is Taf Lamed Zayin, and you'll see the second paragraph from the bottom, Mizeh Yesh Lahavin. See that? Mizeh Yesh Lahavin?
Yeah.
So it's like this. The next page here, you see that Tzedakah Perek Vav, it says Taf Lamed Zayin at the top, Mizeh Yesh Lahavin. Says the Maharal as follows, Mizeh Yesh Lahavin, you have to understand, Kama Gadol Anshe Mishlekech Ribis, the great punishment of somebody that charges interest. The Torah is instructing us that we have to lend willingly to our friend the Jew. For this purpose of being able to look after each other, we were made into one nation. When Jews accept, receive from each other, and do not steal from each other. This guy that is lending with interest and is literally biting his friend. And that which he is biting is taking away. He is minimizing his friend. It's like the bite of a snake. Nachash, which whenever you hear the word Nachash anywhere in the Maharal, anywhere in really any of the Svarim, it's talking about the word of Chet. It says, V'yesh lahavin oynesh haribis. You have to understand the punishment of ribis. It says, Ki al hagezel hagomer yesh al zeh lav echad. V'loi sigzal. If you steal from your friend, you violated one Isur. V'al ribis yesh al zeh kamalav. Taking interest, there are many, many prohibitions involved. But But when it comes to a non-Jew, it is the opposite. Ki ben noach dinay misa ala gezel, a non-Jew that steals is put to death for theft. It's one of the Sheva mitzvahs of Bnei Noach. They're chayiv misa for that. Ubavadei ala ribas eno chayiv klum, and a non-Jew that charges interest to another Jew, to a non-Jew, there is no prohibition at all. Which means that the prohibition of charging interest is deeply connected to our identity as one Jewish body. Goy echad ba'aretz. He says, you also need to understand the terrible nature of ribis, of interest. That even if he does so willingly, even if he pays you back interest willingly, he is over a prohibition as well. There's a prohibition to charge interest and a prohibition to pay interest. He says, this doesn't exist in any other mitzvah. And the reason for this is as follows. Ki Yisrael heim am echad, that the Jewish people are one entity. And because of that, we have one God. Monotheism depends upon a unified nation. That's heavy. But what the Maharal is telling us here is that the notion of monotheism cannot be experienced by a fragmented people. The depth of this will take a tremendously long time to explain. But remez lekach is what we say every single Shabbos by Mincha. Ato echad, v'shimcha echad, umi ka'amcha Yisrael, goy echad ba'aretz. That's this. Ato echad, you're one, v'shimcha echad, your name is one, umi ka'amcha Yisrael, goy echad ba'aretz, who's like the Jewish people, one nation in the land. That's what we're talking about here. If the Jewish people are not one nation in the land, then the possibility of pantheism, polytheism, all sorts of other things is far more prevalent. Jewish people serving one nation under God in Eretz Yisrael makes it possible for monotheism to be espoused in the world, which, by the way, was the mission that Avraham Avinu was tasked with. That's why HaKadosh Baruch Hu says to him, go to Eretz Yisrael, you go there, I'll make you into a great nation. From there, you will spread monotheism. This is the Rambam at the beginning of Hilchas Avaris Kochavim, Perek Beis, Sif Beis, where the Rambam describes that Avram Avinu's mission was exclusively to spread monotheism. All of the morals and values and truths of the world come from an understanding that there is one God. So in order to do that, you need a nation that's going to be able to do that. Nevertheless, says the Maharal, and therefore HaKadosh Baruch Hu commands us that we should lend each other. And that one that steals from his friend. This one is taking from his friend. He makes that which is sweet very bitter. It is the opposite of lending. Lending is, I care about you and you care about me. Lending with interest is saying, I don't care about you. I care about you as a function of me being able to gain wealth. The deep tragedy of ribis is the lack of unity of the Jewish people. Now, in the interest of time, the Maharal continues to explain 5 lines down, that all of this, the halachas of ribis and the halachas of arvus. What's arvus? Kol Yisrael, Arevim Zelasa, that we care for each other, that we have to take responsibility for each other, which the Ritva explains is the reason that even though I've made Kiddush, I can make Kiddush for you, and it's not a bracha l'batala. Yotza moitzi. Says the Ritva, because even if I've made Kiddush, if you haven't made Kiddush, then my Kiddush is lacking. That's Yotza Motzi. You can say Kiddush 1 billion times. It's not a bracha levatala. It's not a bracha levatala. Why? Because unless the whole Jewish people has heard Kiddush, no Kiddush. All of that, all of this whole notion of the Jewish people being unified only begins where? Arvas Mayav. That was the bris at Arvas Mayav just before we walked into Eretz Yisrael. The Gemara is explained. Arvas Mayav was where the Jewish people took upon themselves the bris of Kol Yisrael or Revim Zalazai. It doesn't exist in Chutz La'aretz. It only exists in Eretz Yisrael. It's a new bris. Goy Echad Ba'aretz means that our identity as one nation is exclusive to the presence of the Jewish people as a sovereign entity in the land of Israel. We are not a Goy Echad without it. The emes is this somewhat famous Gra. There's a somewhat famous Gra in his parish of the Safra de Tzniusa, the chelik of the Zohar HaKadosh. The Gra at the end of that parish explains that the Jewish people without Eretz Yisrael is not even a Goy. It's not even a Goy, it's not a Gviyah. It's a Guf and a Neshama that have separated. And we're going to see this a little bit later in Rav Kook's Aris HaTorah, that the body of the Jewish people is Eretz Yisrael, the soul of the Jewish people are us. Says the Gra, what happens to a body when the soul departs from it? It rots and decays. That's what happens to Eretz Yisrael when the Jewish people are in Galus. This is why Shmuel says in Maseches Brachos that you know that Geula is coming when Eretz Yisrael begins to give its fruit. That's the Tchiyah. Tchiyah is amazing, quite literally. The body of the Jewish people is dead. That's Eretz Yisrael. What happens to the Guf? It becomes flighty, ephemeral, disconnected from the world. So we fly upwards. We say this in Kinos, and we say this on Yom Kippur. Ve'ein shiur rak haTorah azos. The only thing that we have left. The only thing that we have left is halacha. The Arba Amos of halacha. That's where a Jew can still be a Jew. That's it. So the Beis Medrash has like the smell of Eretz Yisrael, right? That's why Chazal say that all the Beit Medrash will come to Eretz Yisrael. Now the Nezu would say that, Yom Tov Sheni Shel Golios. You know what they call that in Eretz Yisrael? Yom Tov Sheni Shel Golios. What's that called?
Weekday.
Chol, a weekday. So the Nezu or Sachta would say that a regular day in Eretz Yisrael has the same kedusha as Yom Tov Sheni in Chutz La'aretz. That's the din. It's the same kedusha. It depends on which side. The end of Yom Tov, it's chol. It's not mayit, right? A regular day in Eretz Yisrael is the kedusha of a Yom Tov. Connected, when the Jews connected is planted to Eretz Yisrael, it's a different world. All of this begins with Mika Amcha Yisrael Goy Echad Ba'aretz, planted into the land of Israel. We have the possibility of being a Goy, of being a nation, and planted in Eretz Yisrael, we have the possibility of unity. This is just by way of introduction. Next week, we will begin with understanding this relationship of Olam Shana and Nefesh, of Shmitta, Yovel, Chama, Levana, Yisrael and Adam, Ha-Adam specifically, Prat and Klal. Those of you that would like to hang on to the Marim HaKemes, you are welcome to do so. Those of you that would like to leave them behind, I am more than happy to collect them, and we'll be Hashem bye to next week. And without further ado, turn over to my dear and holy Chaver, Rabbi Grejow.
Go ahead. Well.
Rabbi Lamb's translation of Echad is unique.
Yes. So, Valentine explains, Echad Yochid Miyucha.